Alright everyone, Lego is back again with another project, as always. This is a small project that sort of got inspired from the show, the HBO show, The Last of Us Part 1, following the first game. And I just had the idea to make the Switchblade, and that's what you're seeing me doing right now. I found a screenshot of the in-game Switchblade model, and I just started laying it out in a simple shape trace there. And I don't know if you caught it, but instead of the usual click and click and click um, tracing, I actually did what I do for simpler, more organic shapes, like I do with the flintlock pistols, is that I take straight lines, map out the inflection points of the surrounding curves, and then I shape the straight lines into that to conform to that shape by using the handles. It's a very clean process, it's a very simple process, and it's very powerful to make organic shapes that don't have all those jagged edges or even just sudden turn points that you get from just clicking around the outline of an object. Even when you have it set to spiral or Bezier pen, you'll still get these sudden shifts and turns, and you don't get that with this method. It takes a little bit more post processing, but it's really worth it when you have the final shape because it looks very organic, very clean, and that's just what I wanted for this. It's not a big object, there's not a lot of lines involved, so I have to make everyone count in its own way. And that's why I'm going to the next phase immediately, which is to put on some power strokes to give it more character, like I do with some of the other traced elements I've made previously on other projects. I want to give this a hint of maybe a calligraphic brush or some other element of depicting this using some fancy pen work or something. I don't just want flat lines. I want it to have a little bit of depth and a little bit of character, and I do that by changing the thicknesses in this manner. I find this easier than using an actual calligraphic brush in Inkscape because I have more control this way, even though it takes a little bit longer. So that's what you're seeing now, and I'm just, as I go, when I initially traced it, I tried to make assumptions about how long I wanted each stroke to be. You don't want any closed contours with this, which is why I broke up the outside profile of the knife, if you caught that. I wanted two halves instead, so I can do the thing I'm doing currently with the blade. So it's important to me to have no closed contours when I use this technique. But it went and went well. And at this point, I am just making some subtle adjustments to the overall shape, trying to make the lines flow a bit better together so it doesn't look like separate lines but part of a simple single object. And at this point, I actually decided to try and change the actual profile and the composition of the knife because I actually didn't like the way it was pointed, if that makes sense. Because in my head, the project had the knife in a different way. So I changed that, and after realizing my mistakes in doing it all at once, so I lost the coherency, I did it individually, and this preserved the relative distances to each element so I can get back previous elements later. So having done that, I'm pretty happy, and that's the knife right there. So now it's time to add the text, and the text is really well chosen, if I do say so myself. Um, the text is no secret. It's passing on the mantle, and if you know the history of that switchblade, you'll understand why. But the text choice here is just as important in how I actually wrote it. I wrote this using Grubbifreyan 2, which you can see there on the right. The last time I used this was the first time I used it, and so it was a bit of a wild ride, figuring out the script as well as making a pretty big project with it. But I wanted the same effect this time around. I wanted some uniform text all around, and the idea of the text itself growing or sprouting from the center of the knife was so perfect and so subtle and so thematically on point that I could not do this. I could not do this. Sorry. Um, I had to. It was perfect. So we have a growing organic piece of text growing out of the knife, and this just calls to me in so many ways. There's a lot that just goes hand in hand in this project, and this is just perfect. Beyond the obvious point of the growing out of something that is going on in The Last of Us, we also have Ellie's tattoo, which is I'm not deliberately trying to mimic it, but it is certainly no coincidence that I am using a plant-based language to depict this text in this particular instance. So it all just fell in line in that way. So we got Ellie's tattoo, we got the fungus itself, and then we have some other elements I'm not gonna spoil actually, but just know that I really, really wanted to do this in Grubbifreyan 2 for many reasons, and it worked very well, if I do say so myself. The problem I have with Grubbifreyan 2, or Grubbifreyan in general, is a point I also touched on in my last project using this, is that it's very hard to plan out. You can see in the background there, before I started doing it, and even now as I'm writing it, I have some other scribbles in the background there, just hinting at the space that the other words are going to take up, so that I get a sort of rough idea of how much everything is going to take up, and it leaves me some room to sort of plan out how I want the actual composition of my wording to go. How do I want the flow to go? In which direction do I need to expand on? Where do I need to fill up a gap? Or where do I expect some room to be later on? And so on and so forth. It is nigh impossible to really plan out ahead. But the great thing about Grubbifreyan 2 in particular, and why I'm sticking my guns and um, my whole future on Grubbifreyan, why I'm sticking with the sequel script instead of the original Grubbifreyan, is that I can use any amount of modifiers I want, so long as we have the right kinds. And this means that this script is perfect for just filling up holes in the text wherever I have some empty space. I can just plop in another little branch or flower or a leaf or another modifier or whatever, and it'll look maybe not organic, but at least it'll not look empty. And my job then is to make it look as natural as possible, so it doesn't look like I intentionally just put something in there to fill up space. It needs to look like it makes sense and was meant to be there all along. But yeah, I have only 4 words to write, and so I'm going to really spread my wings, as it were, in terms of how much every letter takes up. And that's what you're seeing, especially on the second and third letter, where there is not a lot of actual wording, but every letter just takes up a ton of space, which is fine if you can make it work. And I like to think I did. The way I write is the same as last time. I use the freehand style pencil with a lot of smoothing, and then every single branch I go in and I tweak the actual handles a bit to make it work better, look more organic, look less jarring. And I tend to actually have snapping on when I do this type of work, because I found out last time also that it just makes it look like you had it all planned from the start. And it also helps you when you do the small branches off to the side, the line modifiers, because you can make them tangent to the actual root or the stem or the trunk or whatever you want to call it, the center line, so that it looks like it was it actually belongs, and I use that a lot. And in terms of the script itself, in terms of writing, actual writing, the workflow you're seeing here is different from the one I used last time because I have gotten smarter, and the last project I did, while huge, also could have really benefited from this different workflow that I'm doing now, which is I'm actually sort of proto writing it in the sense that I'm not actually adding any fill, even if it has to have fill. Even the flowers that need fill, I don't give it yet. I just keep everything strokes, no matter what. And this is going to help me hugely later on in terms of if I want to adjust the density of the actual writing itself, I can just do that in one click instead of having to separate the fills out from the strokes while still maintaining the actual stroke capabilities instead of turning it into paths. I could get the same effect by just turning everything into paths as I go, but then I wouldn't have the options of doing stroke specific effects later on, and I need those. So what I'm doing is now I'm going through each letter again. One, to proofread, because that was a huge issue last time, and two, to actually add the fill where I need the fill, because at this point I have checked my thicknesses, I have decided what density I want where, and I'm happy to proceed with the actual fill where I need the fill, and finalizing the letter, so to speak, while still of course having a copy left back off to the side there in case I need to go back and redo something for whatever reason. Better to have one too many backups than one too few. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just filling up the spaces and I'm verifying that every letter is as it should be. And at this point, I'm happy with that. And it's time to do some effects. Now, this is something that I can afford with smaller projects. Um, Projects of this size, no problem. But if I were to go back in my last Grubbifreyan 2 project and add these thickness effects, it would take absolute ages because I'm using those for every single letter. And that is doable when you only have, what, 14 letters or something, but it's not going to be viable on bigger projects. So this is a luxury that I'm doing here because I really want to do this text justice. I really wanted to give it that growing organic feel. I don't want flat lines. I don't want, well, most of the lines won't be flat anyway, and I really want some organic differences in there, and this is perfect for that. Now I'm only doing it for the center stems. If I were to do that for the every branch, it would be too much work. So I'm leaving those off. I'm only doing the center line stuff. In hindsight, actually, I could have done the same thing I do when I use branches, in that I could use the triangle in effect, and that would actually give me what I want as I go. I'll actually have to think about that. That might be a viable option going forward. Actually, it might work actually. Huh. Well, anyway, so this is the text done basically. I've added all the organic elements I want, and it's time to finalize this and actually get to the usually the fun part, which is the coloring and the effects of the background stuff. So what I did first was unionize the whole thing so that I can control it. And my original idea is what you're going to see first because I had a vision in my head as I usually do, and the vision was something along the lines of what you're about to see. Um, and it's not often that this happens on camera, but sometimes the vision I have turns out to be awful, or at least it doesn't really look that good once I get it into real life. And this is one of those instances where I actually catch some of the iteration work on camera. Usually it happens afterwards. Um, but what you're seeing here now is me trying to make the original idea work, and that is trying to get some dark yellowish, goldish, but not gold. Most importantly, it's not gold. It's not going to be shining. It's going to be dead foliage, brown, yellowish, and then I wanted the something to highlight the knife in the center, and I tried to do that in different ways. And I just realized early on that I need a pretty light background for this to have any contrast, and this is not what I wanted. Um, the paradox was I wanted a dark background, but I also wanted some dark text without the knife getting lost in the lack of contrast. So I really tried to get some different ideas working here. I ended up doing what I tend to end up doing when I need a complicated color scheme with a lot of control, and that is to make a mesh gradient that conforms to whatever I need. This is very, very powerful stuff, and it is very rewarding when it works. But in this case, there was just I could have made it work. It would just have required me to make two different mesh gradients and make them inverse to one another in some way, and that would have worked in theory. As far as I can imagine, it would work, but the inflection points between one gradient and the other would be very faint, and it would not. I don't think it would read very well, even though it would contrast very well. And so I didn't really take it that far, even though it might have worked. So we're back to the dark background again, because I really want the dark background. That's paramount. And at this point, I've just decided that okay, the text needs to be lighter than I can't have both. And I'm also trying to offset the knife a little bit because it was getting lost. So I did some silver effects there just to give it some contrast. And then at the last moment, I tried to add some grit, some distress, and I've used distress before on the Last of Us projects, and I've done it with to great effect, but I've never done it colored before. At least not something I released publicly, because it really wasn't that pretty. Colored distress is tricky for me to work with. I haven't cracked that yet, how to make that look good. And so you can see here, I actually skipped ahead a bit, did some off-camera work before I decided, hey, this needs to be recorded. I'm trying to go back to the source material, go back to ground, and really try and do this again from the bottom up. I had a lot of success using distress on black and whites, so I went back to the original and tried to work my way back from the black and white image and what works, and see if I could make something that worked with me instead of against me. So I'm trying out different densities, I'm trying out different colors and contrasts to see what works, because I want some distress, but I don't want it to actually obscure the text to the point where you can't read it. You still need to be able to read it. So I am playing around a bit with different tracings to find a balance of something that can coexist with the text, basically, as well as in this case I took the knife out, and I decided I didn't want any distress on the knife itself. I wanted it to, like, by not having any distress, it stands out. And so I was going back and taking the original shape before I split it up into strokes and put that back in there. And now I'm just trying out different methods of trying to offset the, I guess, the distress itself from the text. And my first thought was taking some a white shadow behind the text and trying to not make it look too obvious that it's there, because if it looks too uniform, it looks weird. And having done that, I decided that it needs a little hint of color, similar to how my CC Gallifreyan work went on The Last of Us. And at this point, I stopped recording because I thought I had it. I thought this was it. This was the closest thing I had to my vision. And so this is the result I had. But I tend to let my projects sit for a day or two. I've learned my lesson, both for proofreading purposes and also for just second impression purposes, because I tend to lose sight of the trees for the forest, so to speak. I find that it helps a lot if you just make something, go away for a bit, and then come back. And what I came back to the day after was not as much satisfaction as I thought. I had a few ideas churning in my mind. I had a few different concepts that I wanted to try out, and so I didn't actually start recording again because I was just playing around. But what I ended up doing is, as you can see on screen now, I did a bunch of iterations, just trying to play around with the different grittiness and the different offsettings I could do with a knife. I didn't really like the fact that I had to, in the original finished product, I had to make the distress a different color just so that I could read the text. I didn't want that. I wanted the same black all throughout or nothing at all. So I played around with some stuff. You could see roughly in which directions I went. I tried some different knife colors. I tried some different offsettings. I tried some different levels of noise in the background, I guess you could say. And then I finally settled on this. So this is where the project ended after some iterations and after taking a step back. Even though I still like the original finished piece, I think this is a bit more developed, a bit more finished in terms of what I wanted to do from the start. Even though I couldn't do the actual project that I had in my head, this is the best realized version I've made, I think. So on that note, I think I'll leave it here. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.